meet you all. Thanks for coming. I feel like we're at like a silent disco, and like the green song's gonna win. The purple song is not where you want to be. So anyway, thanks for coming. If you're here, you want to hear about some data mesh stuff. That's just sort of my title slide. We'll skip that. I usually do this talk in 50 minutes, so we're gonna like kill it in 20 minutes, which means you'll probably have questions. So maybe afterwards we can hang out or get some questions done after. But the first question is like, why Ascend and data mesh? We are a data automation platform. Our architecture and the way Ascend was designed quite a few years ago fully supports data mesh, and it fits super nice on top of Databricks and allows you to build a fully functional automated data mesh on Databricks in your lakehouse. So by automation, we mean you don't do create table statements in Ascend. The toil work of engineering is much better in Ascend. We remove all that stuff. That's the end of the Ascend pitch. So if you're here and you saw the word data mesh and you're here because of that, you've probably done some research, and if you read white papers and all that, it seems complicated, right? There's lots of terms, there's lots of things that you need to understand or learn about it. And so I'm a sort of a practical architecture person. When I put my enterprise architecture hat on, I'm like, how do we actually do some work, right, that's useful? So let's talk about some ways to do that. Oops. So what I want to do here in the next 18 minutes and 7 seconds is go through kind of three little phases. One is let's talk about data mesh as a strategy, just so we're all on the same page and we can kind of agree on what the benefits are. Then we want to talk about outcomes. Like, so if you're going to go do a mesh, like what should you expect to get out of it? Like that's a really important thing to understand. And then again, back to the practical nature, like what are you going to do? So yeah, I'm doing the data mesh. What am I doing on day one? Like what tasks am I actually going to do? And what do I need to watch out for? How do I plan for it? So let's do that. If we do some research on mesh, you're gonna find that Zhamak Dehghani gets attributed with essentially putting together the data mesh term a few years ago. In her work with Martin Fowler, I'm a huge Martin Fowler fan, but these concepts, she didn't necessarily invent these concepts, but she is credited with putting them together in a scenario that drives data mesh. So if you distill it down, the two important things about mesh are, one, we need to have data as a product. So we need to get feedback from customers. We need to react to that feedback. We need to make our data products easier to use, easier to consume, so that those data products can get reused more often. We can go faster, and we can do all those product-y things. Product mindset has been in the front-end world for a long time. Pulling it back into data actually provides very similar benefits, if not even greater benefit in some cases. Combining that with this bounded context concept where I take my business areas, so I might have customers, I might have shipments, and I'm going to create data domains around these business concepts, and I'm going to make sure that these domains are separate so that I can operate them and build them separately, and then have real business keys that cross the context barriers. So in that way, I can focus my engineering more deeply into simpler models that then I can reassemble into data products. So if we combine both of those concepts, that's what when I refer to data mesh, it's heavily informed by those two things. So if we click once into a little bit lower level, what does it actually look like from an architectural standpoint? You know, if you're an engineer or not, we like to have diagrams. So here's a diagram. The outside circles, these are your business domains. So it could be a customer, it could be shipment, it could be whatever your business actually produces, widgets. And we're going to combine those domains and actually provide business value through data products that we assemble from those. So very rarely does a single business area have a product. You generally have to combine them. So if I'm doing I have a few examples later, but we're going to combine them in certain ways. That comes with some assumptions. If you're here talking because you're interested in mesh, chances are really good you're here because you come from a monolithic architecture. So your data architecture right now could be a single model. I've had under my purview dimensional models that had 800 tables in them. This is like these models are monolithic. They're hard to understand. In your organization, you may only have a couple people who actually understand enough of it to get any work done, which ends up bottlenecking all the work you're doing, and you slow down. And every time you add a new feature, it's a slog, and it takes a long time. So the hyper specialization is a problem for bottlenecking, and then the complexity is driven through this everything for everyone data model. I end up with this model, and I try to produce all these business outcomes from the same set of data. The queries get complicated. I end up having this query that everybody copies and pastes for like 5 years. Nobody knows how it works, but it gets you the right answer. Like these are aspects of monolithic architecture for sure. So if we're going to talk about data mesh, like, are we going to actually solve these problems? So what would happen if we built a mesh, and are these problems really going to go away? And the reason mesh can scale an organization and have you drive a lot faster is primarily because we're shifting the ownership of the domain data and the pipelines off to groups that are specialists in those areas. So I'm going to have a customer domain. Those people who technically engineer that domain are going to have really good friends on the business side, and they're going to understand what there is, everything there is to know about a customer, and they're going to own the pipeline for that. So when it comes to adding customer data, updating customer data, curating that data, producing a contract, like what are my customer keys, these domains are then owned in a much smaller area. That drives down complexity, and it drives up the ability to then produce a product that's reusable. Or the other two things are important too. The product mindset really comes to fruition. Like if you have let's say you have a customer, I keep using customer because everybody knows what a customer is, right? But if you have a customer domain and it's missing a field, like, and your customers are saying, hey, I need middle initial or whatever, like you can actually react to that and give them an upgrade to these data products, and that makes them happier. It makes the consumption of your product more easily consumed, and it makes it more pervasive in your org. Self-service is important. Everybody wants to do data democratization, but nobody actually gets there. Data mesh can actually help you get to a self-service model in your BI tools or in your machine learning environment where you don't have to have a meeting with engineering to figure out how to get your data. You could actually have data sets available to you that are self-describing and easy to understand and easy to find. So if we're going to build a mesh, let's actually build a mesh. Let's not say it's a mesh and not have it be a mesh. So what does that mean? If I'm looking at an environment, like if I'm doing a value stream analysis for a customer or something, these are the attributes that a mesh in general is going to have. We don't have time to go through all of them, but the discoverability and shareability is a key component. So if I'm building a mesh and I have a customer domain and I can't share that data to other people so they can consume it, I can call it a mesh all day long, but if I'm not reusing this data, I'm not getting the benefit out of it. So why did I even do the project? Just leave it in the monolithic space if you're not actually going to share this data across multiple areas. The last one there, everybody needs to be secure. We're not going to talk about that, but the standardization is important too. You have to have a internal discussion and concept around what does it mean to standardize around data models. Do you want like transport layers? Do you want REST data environment? Do you want a JDBC environment? Do you want like flat files or whatever? There's any way to solve that, but do you also want to standardize across that? You don't have to. You can build a mesh in all kinds of different ways, but if you're going to standardize and you're starting to build a mesh, it's important to consider all the technology that's available to you and how you're going to leverage that technology in a standard way so that you can go faster. It'll make your operations people happier too. So just to clarify one more time, if I'm building an actual data product in a mesh, I'm taking these separate domains, which are business concepts that like come to fruition in our technology. We have friends in the business, we have beer with them, we like understand the language, and it's all great. We're going to combine those then into products. So I'm going to create, in this example, a shipment profile for all my customers, but I'm going to have to combine the shipment domain and the customer domain. The critical part is that arrow that says share. You have to be able to share the data to do this. Otherwise, you're doing it through a view, and you have to file a ticket, and engineering is doing the work. And you just didn't build a mesh then. You just built a monolithic model and called it a mesh. You actually have to be able to share it. So strategically, if we're all on the same page, it looks like everybody's happy. That's cool. Let's talk about outcomes, because I like when I do architecture work or work for customers in adopting or migrating from monolithic architectures to a mesh. Like the really important thing is this is actually working. Like these benefits that I supposedly are going to get, am I actually getting these benefits? And if I'm actually getting them, what do they mean to me? Like, am I saving money? Am I going faster? Like, what's actually happening? So let's talk through that a little bit. I think it's really important for all engineers to have a business concepts available to them so they can help themselves understand and prioritize why we're doing work the way we are. I like to talk about ROI when we do data mesh. I dislike creating a spreadsheet that does all the calculations and all that, but I do like actually measuring things. These are 3 ideas that I've used in the past several times, and they work awesome if you can get the data or have a proxy for the data. So let's just talk about them real quick. If I'm doing a mesh and I'm in a monolithic world and I'm trying to go to a mesh, I should be going faster, right? So I should be producing more stuff. So maybe you measure, like, what's the time to deliver a report? Maybe it's 2 months today. If you can get it to a week with a mesh, that's awesome. So let's measure that. You may have different outcomes that you want. You may actually produce data for customers. You may want to go from a weekly report to a daily report and you can't get there, so you're doing a mesh. Like, however you measure your velocity, every customer does it differently, but we should measure it and we should hold ourselves accountable for that. The second one is not as obvious, but if I'm building a mesh, one of the points of a mesh is I should be able to take my customer domain and then use it all over the place. So if that's the case, let's actually measure how many times are we reusing this domain. We should measure that. If I'm doing a mesh and I only have one customer for this domain, you got to step back and go, why did I do all that work? I had one customer before, I still have one customer, and what's the benefit now, right? But if we're actually going to produce a mesh that has approachability and it has like self-service notions in it, and it has the domain or the product mindset built into my development cycles, I should be reusing these things for sure. I should see those domains get reused. I love the human side of engineering too. I think the number of people in meetings should be really smaller. The same 2 people shouldn't be in every meeting anymore that you probably have. And then the people who are in the meetings should be less technical. You should be able to have a business person and maybe an analyst or a data scientist sort of say, hey, we want to do customer analysis. We need this and this. Here's our dictionary and here's these business keys that we all understand. So why do I need an engineer in the room? It shouldn't be the case. So I think we should measure that. And I think we should hold the product mindset accountable for giving that feedback so that we get engineers doing engineering work and not a proxy for whatever business queries people want to write. I'm sure you have ideas too. Those are just 3 that I like to use. They work really well. Back to like, what does this feel like, right? So I'm doing this really great work and my org should change a little bit, I would hope, because this is a big change. If you come from a monolithic world, this is kind of like how the world is. You have this data engineer, they're doing a bunch of work, it's awesome, takes a while, and then the analyst gets their ticket done and they do a little bit of stuff and they build a report and I'm good, right? And that cycle may take a month or 6 months or whatever, but this is typical, right? The question is, if I do a mesh, like what should it be? So if I, on day 1, maybe no, but like a year into it, and I achieve some level of maturity, what should happen? In the mesh architecture, this should be what it feels like. So there's a few important things down here. One is the domain engineers are now domain engineers, not data engineers. We'll talk about that in a second. But they should be doing less work. They're not working on a monolithic model. They're working in smaller, less complex things. And they can provide more structured, simpler data as a domain model. So there should be less work to do. It shouldn't be as complicated. And then I should be able to then, if I'm actually reusing my domains, get more fingers on keyboards downstream of the engineering. So I should be able to have analysts and data scientists actually pick up this data. Our song is better. Pick up this data and then use it more actively and sooner. So my development cycle should be shorter. I should actually drive some self-service out of this. So that's how a mesh architecture should feel. So be prepared for that. If you do mesh and you're not actually considering a reorganization a little bit about roles and responsibilities, you're probably not building a mesh. You're probably going to devolve back into a monolithic architecture. Real quick, data engineers versus domain engineers. Sometimes it's like, oh, it's just semantics. And it is to some extent, but there's actually some real differences here. Prioritization is one that's really easy to talk about, which is like, if I'm in a monolithic model and I get requests and I'm I understand the whole model. How do I prioritize something for product versus like shipment? Like, how do I prioritize those two things? Like, I have no idea. In the domain model, though, the prioritization is clear. Like, oh, I'm the customer engineer, so my priorities are all customer. I don't have to worry about any of these other domains. So that's a real clear side effect of reorganizing this way. And this is one reason why I like to actually change the name. Sometimes it's marketing, but it works, right? Like if you tell an engineer, hey, you're a domain engineer, focus on product or focus on customer, like that's your focus right now for the next 3 months or whatever. It tends to actually drive work and you get better outcomes doing that for sure. Context switching is better and all that. The bottom point is actually kind of fun to talk about too. If everybody becomes a domain engineer and I have no shared resources left in corporate IT, what is the role for it then? Which is an interesting question. By the way, you don't have to hire engineers for every domain. You can share them. You just can't break the rules. Like you can't let somebody who's doing product and shipment cut a corner and then all of a sudden join these models together, because you're going to devolve back very quickly back into a monolithic model. So keeping those bounded contexts separated is really key. Oh my gosh. So outcomes, check. We have ROI, we have all this stuff. Let's talk about what we're actually going to do. So we agree on the strategy, we agree on what we're going to measure. What are we doing on day one, right? So whether you're building a mesh or not, and if you're still in a monolithic architecture, totally fine. I think you should take data as a product mindset and use it anyway. It doesn't matter what your data looks like. Getting feedback from customers, improving your data models, and publishing better data for your consumers is like one of our number one tasks. So we should do that. We should actually build processes that help us get feedback and then reply with that feedback with actually better data products for our business customers. That's what they're asking for. I would argue we're kind of bad at it. That's why engineering's got the forever backlog that never changes, and my thing goes in the middle and it never gets to the top. Like, we should solve that problem, right? So if mesh is like so good, you're like, what's the catch? Like, where am I going to run into problems, right? I like to start with the assumptions underneath mesh, because these are the places where if you're not really clear about what the assumptions are, if the assumptions are wrong, you're going to have problems. One is, I actually have domain experts available to me. It's amazing to me how many businesses operate and make money, but if you sit down and say, hey, I need somebody who's an expert in customer who can help my engineer figure out a data model, it's like, I don't know, we don't know how that works, right? That's an assumption that needs to be true. Like, you're gonna have a really hard time building a data mesh if you don't understand how your business operates. So that has to work. Of course, you need technology too. Lots of companies run their finance still out of Microsoft Excel. I know billion-dollar companies that still do it out of Excel. It's probably not a great place to like build a data mesh. You also need to have data pipelines and sharing capability. So if you're trying to build a mesh, you have to have a way to share the data. And technically, Ascent has an opinion. It's super easy, a couple clicks. But like, you still have to have a security model. You have to be able to share. You have to have contracts. You have to figure that out. Like, that problem has to be solved. Otherwise, you're not going to share the data. And it's always going to be an engineering task to like actually write the report. And that's not the goal. We're trying to get to sharing, right? Pipelining is important too. You got to keep it up to date. You got to have all that. It needs to be automated. This is my favorite one. Working governance strategy. You got to have one of those. The key word in that sentence though is working. You need to have change control. If you're going to reuse these domains and you have a customer domain and there's like maybe 100 consumers and you change it, you have to have a way of communicating those changes to your customers. You have to tell them, hey, version 2 is out and it adds a column that does X, Y, Z. That's basic change management, change control. Governance can also be security. It can be all these other things. But at the end of the day, if we're using our product mindset, one of our things that we need to be careful of is we don't want to break it and make all our customers mad, right? We want to have a smooth way of communicating these changes, hopefully automatically publishing the changes. So for changes that are non-breaking, maybe they just show up and it's awesome. That's our opinion at Ascent, but I like that one. And then the last point is every domain needs some level of maturity. It doesn't mean it has to be perfect. If you have a maturity scale on the back of a napkin, it doesn't have to be 10 out of 10, but Excel is not the right place to build a data mesh either. So understanding how your domains are going to actually, where they're coming from a data perspective is really important, because that'll help inform you how you're going to actually approach that. And you may have to do a project before you actually build a mesh to increase your technology maturity in certain areas. Maybe not across the board. Like maybe you have a great CRM system that does like 90% of it, but some of your really critical data is in CSV files somewhere, and you actually gotta solve those problems too. So, I'm sorry I have to go so fast. Skip that. Okay, so it's day 0. We're getting started. We have to make some decisions, right? So what is our actual plan to bridge these domain and tech gaps? We're gonna hire consultants? Are we gonna like grab a business person for 3 months and like get all the information out of them? Like, how are we actually gonna do that? We're gonna buy software? We're gonna build software? What are we doing, right? We also have to decide, what are you gonna do about platform standardization? That's an important decision to make. And then, are you building or buying? I like this to be an actual decision and not a de facto decision. If you ask a Spark engineer to solve your problem, you're going to get Spark code. So, but let's take a step back and sort of say, hey, like, what should we be doing here? What parts of this system do we want to maintain and curate because it's important for internal knowledge? And which parts do we want a vendor to do for us? And those are legitimate questions. Regardless of what you're doing in your lakehouse, though, I'm assuming you're using a lakehouse. There's other tools, but these two things need to be true. You have to have data pipelines and you have to have sharing. If you don't have that technology available to you, then it's not going to work out very well. Or you're not building a mesh, actually. I got 2 seconds for a demo, I think. This is what an inbound sharing. On the left there's a couple of shares for some master data. And then this is like a view of what an analyst might do, creating some nice weather cab rides and rainy weather cab ride data plugged into like some report. So think of Power BI hooked into that or something. This is how Ascent views the world. That data share originates in a pipeline that actually does the ingestion and all the engineering work. And then through the sharing capability, which can actually cross physical Databricks boundaries. So if you have 2 Databricks environments, for example, we can cross those automatically. But through that mechanism, you can build pipelines that interconnect in a mesh and get all your updates automated. So that's all the time I have. And thanks for coming. Appreciate your time.